There is a thing you understand only at the very end. Not when you lose your home. Not when you see water swallowing streets, cars, entire districts. Not when the sky stops being blue and turns into some dirty lead gray color, as if someone had squeezed all the colors out of it and poured them straight down. You understand it only when 4 people whom you fed, protected, and carried on yourself for 3 months look at you without malice, without hatred, almost calmly, and push. Park Jun-ho did not even have time to be surprised. Just his back, the air, the impact with the water. A cold so severe that his lungs clenched into a fist and refused to unclench. He went under the surface quickly, too quickly for a man who had survived 3 months in flooded Incheon, knew how to swim, and knew how to stay afloat. But he did not stay afloat. Not because he could not, but because he was looking up at the dark belly of the raft, at the silhouettes of 4 people who did not even lean over to see whether he had drowned. Choi Min-jun was already saying something to the others, probably about the supplies that could now be divided among 4 instead of 5. Lee Sonu nodded. Kim Hae-eun turned away first. Only In Jae-hyun looked into the water for about 3 seconds. Then he turned away too. So this is how it is. Junhyo felt the cold leaving. It was a bad sign he knew enough to understand. When the cold leaves, it means the body is giving up. He allowed himself to sink a little deeper. The murky water closed more tightly above his head. The pressure in his ears became dull and even. The last thing he thought about was not revenge, not justice. He thought, I would have built it better. The raft they had knocked together out of trash was a disaster from the first day. He told them about balance, about an anchor, about how they needed to raise the deck at least half a meter higher while the waves were still small. They laughed, called him paranoid. And when he finally started doing something with his hands, they began calling him ballast. Eats too much, obeys too little. I would have built a shelter that would never sink. Darkness. The darkness lasted exactly long enough to understand you are no longer drowning, because you are lying on something solid. There is a floor beneath you, an ordinary concrete parking garage floor. Above you are pipes, fluorescent lamps, the smell of motor oil and old rubber. Park Jun-ho sat up. His hands were whole, no wounds. His clothes were dry. Jeans, a gray hoodie with a university print, sneakers. He looked at the sneakers for several seconds. He remembered these sneakers. He bought them 3 days before the flood began. Before it began. His heart clenched with such force that he grabbed his chest. He raised his eyes. There was a car standing opposite. A white Kia Sorento with intact windows, without a single scratch. A parking ticket was on the windshield. The date on the ticket was clear, readable. March 18th, 42 days before the first wave hit Incheon. Junho slowly got up. He checked his pockets, phone, wallet, apartment keys. Everything was in place. The phone showed 80% charge and a normal network. He walked out of the parking garage. Outside was soul alive, noisy, indifferent. People were walking along the sidewalks. Buses were passing by. In the cafe on the corner, someone was drinking coffee and scrolling through a phone. Shunyo stood in the middle of the sidewalk and people walked around him the way they walk around a pole or a trash bin. 42 days. He had 42 days until the end of the world. That was when a screen appeared before his eyes. Not a phone screen, just in the air. Transparent, slightly bluish like a film on water. The text was in Korean, clear, without unnecessary embellishment. System activated name, Park Jun-ho status, Regressor 1. Death special conditions, memory of the future confirmed. Experienced threat classified as global flood, Omega level. You have been assigned a unique system, the best shelter. The system analyzes the threat, calculates optimal structures, and provides blueprints, materials, and engineering solutions unavailable to standard technologies. Objective? Build a shelter capable of surviving an Omega-class apocalypse, accept/decline. Junho looked at the screen for a long time, longer than necessary. Then he pressed accept and felt something click in his head. As if someone had turned on the light in a dark room, and it turned out that the room was much bigger than it had seemed from outside. Knowledge poured in not as words, more like understanding. As if he had always known what a pontoon foundation with wave pressure compensation was, how a closed air exchange cycle works in a sealed space. Why standard steel structures lose up to 40% of their load-bearing capacity during prolonged immersion, and what to do about it. He stopped by a shop window and saw his reflection. 28 years old. A thin face, dark eyes, nothing special. But the look was different, not angry, just closed off. Like a door that had been locked from the inside and the key thrown away. Junho turned away from the reflection. 42 days. Then we start today. The first thing Junho did was withdraw all the money from his card. Not because he trusted the system, but because in 42 days money would become just paper, and there was nothing to lose. 840,000 won was everything he had in the account, plus a small loan which he took out that same day from 2 different banks. The system gave no financial advice. This was his own decision, simple and cold, to take loans that no one would ever need to repay. The world would drown before the first payment reminder arrived. Second, he opened the system interface and spent several hours in it right there in the cafe, sipping an Americano that was in no hurry to cool down. The interface was arranged without unnecessary beauty. The best shelter system. Level 1 construction points. CP 0 active blueprints, 0 available categories. Foundation systems locked, unlock required. Above water structures locked. Energy locked. Life support locked, defense locked. Complete the first task to unlock basic blueprints. 0-day task. Acquire or lease a water area or coastal zone plot of at least 800 square meters. Deadline, 7 days. Reward, 500 CP plus unlocking of the foundation systems and above water structures categories. Junho set the phone aside, the real one, not the system screen, and looked out the window. A water area, a plot on the water. In Korea, it was not as simple as it sounded. The coastal zone around Incheon, the port city he knew best, was partly under municipal control, partly leased to logistics companies. But there were abandoned plots too. Old fishing piers, decommissioned docks, industrial berths no one had used for 10 years. He knew one like that. He had seen it hundreds of times when he went to visit his uncle in Incheon. An old fishing cooperative on the edge of the bay, bankrupt since before his student years. Concrete piles, a rusty canopy, documents surely lost somewhere between 3 bankruptcies and 2 resales. Perfect. He got to Incheon by bus by evening. The place looked exactly as he remembered, abandoned to such a degree that it seemed as if it were asking someone to come and take it apart piece by piece. A long pier on old concrete piles stretching about 70 meters into the bay. 2 warehouses without roofs. A rusty crane that, judging by its appearance, had jammed back under Kim Dae-jung. Junho walked to the end of the pier. Every step echoed hollowly beneath his feet. The water below was dark, calm. The sky in the west burned with a cold orange. He stood at the edge of the pier and looked at the bay. Here, right here. He spent another hour on site walking, measuring with his steps, looking at the piles. The system was silent, but when he reached the end of the pier and stopped exactly above the center of the water area, a short line flashed in the interface. The system has detected a potential construction point. Recommended. Junho allowed himself a small, almost imperceptible nod. Good. So I was not mistaken. He sorted out the documents in 4 days, and that was a separate story, almost detective-like. The cooperative was registered in the name of a man who had died 8 years earlier. 2 years later, his heirs sold the property to a small logistics firm. That firm went bankrupt. The assets went to auction. Another firm bought them there, and that was where the trail ended. The second firm existed only on paper, and Junho spent a day and a half finding its director, an elderly man named Ogasak, who ran a small fishing shop in Incheon and apparently had long forgotten that he owned some pier. Junho came to his shop at exactly 9 in the morning, when it had just opened. I want to lease your pier in the bay's industrial zone, he said without preamble. 12 months, payment up front. Oh, Gisak looked at him for about 3 seconds, then scratched the back of his head. That old pier? There's nothing there. I know. That suits me. Another pause. What do you need it for? An art project, said Junho. An installation on the water. Ogasak clearly did not understand what that meant, but cash the full amount for 12 months placed on the counter between the floats and fishing hooks spoke convincingly enough. 2 days later, Junho had the lease agreement. That same night, the system issued the first notification. 0-day task completed. Received 500 CP unlocked. Foundation systems above water structures. First blueprint available. Floating foundation. Type A modular pontoon system. Description: a prefabricated pontoon foundation made of reinforced polymer concrete with internal variable pressure air chambers. Load capacity up to 400 tons. Resistance to wave impact up to level 9. Autonomous service life without maintenance of at least 15 years. Special feature: when the water level rises, the foundation automatically adjusts buoyancy, maintaining a stable height of the superstructure above the surface. Required materials: open list. Junho opened the list and read for a long time. Then he opened it a second time and read even longer. The materials were not fantastical, all of it existed, was produced, was sold. It was just that no one had thought to assemble it in exactly this way, in this configuration. The system does not create miracles, he realized. It simply knows what people have not reached on their own. That was even better than miracles. You cannot explain miracles to a site foreman. The next morning, Park Junho smiled for the first time in many years, not broadly, barely perceptibly at the corner of his mouth as he looked at the blueprint in the interface. Then he took his phone and started looking for polymer concrete suppliers in Incheon. He had 36 days left. The work was only beginning. The first supplier Junho called hung up in the 3rd minute of the conversation. The second listened to the end, then asked whether he was joking, and hung up too. The third, a small company from Incheon dealing with industrial coatings for port facilities, agreed to meet. His name was Yom Sang-gu, about 50 years old, with the hands of a man who had worked with materials all his life rather than spreadsheets. He came to the meeting at a cafe near the port, ordered green tea, set his elbows on the table, and looked at Junho with the expression of a man who had 10 minutes and not a second more. Junho placed a printout in front of him. Not the system blueprint that existed only in the interface. An ordinary sheet of paper with figures, a diagram, and a list of materials that he had translated into standard technical terms. Yom Sang-gu took the sheet. He read for a long time, turned it over, read the backside. "Where did you get this?" he finally asked. "I developed it myself. Are you an engineer?" "No." Pause. "Then how do you know about modular reinforcement with variable chamber density?" "I read a lot," said Junho. Yom Sang-gu looked at him over the paper. There was no trust in his gaze, but there was something else. The professional interest of a man who sees a technical solution and cannot help but recognize that it is competent. "What do you want to build?" "A floating platform. About 800 square meters in the first phase. A pontoon foundation, modular with automatic buoyancy adjustment." "Why do you need buoyancy adjustment?" "In case the water level rises." Yom Sang-gu slowly set his cup on the table. "The water level in the bay will not rise. This is a stable area. Stable for now," said Junho. A long silence. Timeline? 20 days for the foundation, then the superstructure. Total time 36 days. Yom Sang-gu almost laughed. Almost, because something in Junho's face stopped him. "That's impossible. If we work in 3 shifts, it's possible," said Junho. "I pay for 3 shifts, plus 20% extra for speed." Yom Sang-gu looked at the paper again, then at Junho, then out the window, at the gray water of the bay. "Money up front," he finally said. "Half up front, half upon completion. 70 up front." 60, said Junho without pause. "And I personally control every stage. Any deviation from the blueprint, the work is redone. I do not accept anything that is approximately similar." Yom Sang-gu looked at him for another 3 seconds. Then he held out his hand. "Deal." The next day, the first workers appeared on the old pier. There were 8 of them, Yom Sang-gu's crew, accustomed to port facilities, dampness, and wind, and working with heavy structures in not the most comfortable conditions. They arrived early in the morning in 2 trucks, unloaded the equipment, inspected the pier with the look of people who had seen worse places, and got to work. Junho stood aside and watched. He did not interfere without necessity. For the first hours, he simply observed, checking against the system interface where a simulation of the process was running in parallel. The system did not give direct commands to the workers, it gave him understanding, and he already decided when and how to use it. The first intervention happened by noon. The foreman, a sturdy man of about 40 named Jong Bowman, began marking the positions for the first pontoon sections, and Junho saw that the marking was shifted 1.5 meters north of the calculated point. "Stop," he said. Jung Bomin turned around with the expression of a man being interrupted while working. What is the problem? Your marking does not take into account the direction of the prevailing currents in this section of the bay. If shifted north, the southwest corner of the platform will receive a disproportionate load during a storm. In 2 or 3 years, this will cause fatigue cracks in the joint nodes. A long pause. How do you know that? I studied the hydrological data for this section over the last 20 years, said Junho. Move the marking 1 meter 40 south from your current position. Jang Bamin stared at him for 4 seconds. Then, without a word, he moved the marking stake. Junho nodded and stepped aside. He did not explain twice. He did not raise his voice. He did not apologize for correcting people with many years of experience. He simply said what needed to be done and walked away. Those who were used to that style began to respect him. Those who were not used to it were angry for the first couple of days. Then they too began to respect him. By the evening of the first day, Jang Bomin approached Junho himself. Listen, he said without preamble, did you really calculate all this yourself? Yes. Why don't you work as an engineer? Not my thing, said Junho. Jang Bomin fell silent. What is this even going to be? A restaurant on the water? An art project? A residential complex? On the water? In the bay? Yes. Another pause. All right, said Jang Bamin in the tone of a man who had decided not to ask any more questions. Your money. By the end of the first week, the foundation work was running a day and a half ahead of schedule. The pontoon sections, each measuring 3 by 3 meters, weighing about 8 tons, were arriving from the factory in batches and being joined directly on the water with an accuracy ensured not by the crew's experience, but by Junho's system blueprints. Each joint node was calculated so that a 5 millimeter installation error did not affect the final rigidity of the structure. Junho slept in a small cubicle in the old warehouse, which he had arranged in 2 hours. A folding cot, a sleeping bag, a laptop, a thermos of coffee. At first, the workers looked at this in confusion. Then they got used to it. Every evening, he opened the system interface and checked the progress. On the 8th day, the system issued a new task. First frame task. Complete the installation of the foundation tier with an area of no less than 400 square meters. Current progress, 31%. Deadline, 12 days. Reward, 800 CP plus unlocking of the energy and life support categories. 800 construction points. Junho already knew what they unlocked. He had studied the unlock tree in the interface in considerable detail. Energy provided blueprints for autonomous generators with a hydrogen cycle, life support water purification systems, air exchange, autonomous power supply. All of it was critical. All of it had to be obtained before the flood began. He returned to the laptop and began recalculating the schedule. 12 days for 400 square meters of foundation. At the current pace, it was possible. But the delivery of the next batch of sections had to be accelerated, and that meant another call to the factory, another surcharge, another explanation of impossible deadlines to someone who did not understand why there was such a rush. Junho picked up the phone. Outside the window, it was night. The bay glowed with the reflected lights of the port, and somewhere far away a container ship was moving large, slow, certain that the world would stand for a long time yet. It won't, thought Junho, looking at its lights. But that is no longer my problem. On the 12th day after his return, Junho met Choi Min-jun. It happened by chance, although Junho had long stopped believing in chance. He had come to a hardware store in central Incheon for fastening elements that were needed faster than the main supplier could deliver them. And he ran into Min-jun near the tool shelf. Choi Min-jun was exactly as Junho remembered him, before the apocalypse, tall with a broad smile, with that special expression that can seem friendly and slightly condescending at the same time. He saw Junho first. "Oh, Junho," he said with sincere joy. "Long time no see. Are you in Incheon now?" "Temporarily," said Junho. "What are you doing? I heard you completely disappeared somewhere after university." "Building." "Building what?" "Something." Min-jun laughed as usual, lightly. He had always known how to laugh, as if any conversation were a bit of a game. "You've become mysterious. Remember, we were thinking of getting together for Chuseok? Lee Sonu said he wanted to rent a place by the sea. Kim Haeun promised to cook." "No," said Junho. "No what?" "I won't come," he said simply. He took the necessary fasteners from the shelf, nodded to Min-jun, and went to the cashier. Minjin watched him go with only mild surprise. He did not know that 8 weeks ahead he would be standing on a raft of trash and looking into the water for about 3 seconds before turning away. Junho knew. He got into the car, put the fasteners on the passenger seat, and sat motionless for about 30 seconds. There was no anger. He had expected anger hot, sharp. But instead there was something cold and quiet, like that darkness under the water when the body is already giving up and becoming calm. You are already dead, he thought, looking into the rearview mirror where Minjun had come out of the store and was walking to his car. You just do not know it yet. He started the engine and drove away. He encountered the other 3 over the course of the following week, as if the city were deliberately bringing them together before the end. Or as if Junho had simply begun to notice them, where he had not noticed them before, because now he looked at every person with different knowledge. Lee Sonu worked in a coffee shop near the port, a temporary job while he was looking for a permanent position. He too was glad to see him, also suggested they call each other, and also received a short answer and a puzzled look in return. He saw Kim Haeun from afar near the supermarket and walked past without stopping. She did not notice him. And Jae Hyun, the last of the 4, called himself. Somehow he learned the number most likely through mutual acquaintances and called in the evening when Junho was returning from the site. I heard you're building something at the port, Jae Hyun said. His voice was cautious, almost guilty, although he knew nothing for which he should have felt guilty. Not yet, he didn't. Is everything all right with you? Yes, said Junho. You've somehow changed. Minjin said you were acting strangely. I'm busy. All right. Well, if anything, we're here. Old friends have not gone anywhere. Junho looked at the water of the bay, which in the sunset light was almost beautiful. I know, he said. Goodbye, Jae-hyun. He ended the call, put the phone away. Old friends, he repeated to himself quietly, without bitterness, simply as a fact that no longer mattered. He opened the system interface and checked the progress at the site. The foundation was 68% complete. On the 18th day, the foundation tier was fully closed. 420 square meters of modular pontoon sections, joined with an accuracy of 3 millimeters, covered with a protective polymer layer, equipped with 84 pressure valves that automatically responded to changes in the water level. The system issued a notification. First frame task completed. Received 800 CP unlocked. Energy, life support. Current CP balance, 1,300. New task, skeleton. Complete the installation of the load-bearing frame of the first level of the superstructure. Deadline, 10 days. Reward, 1,200 CP plus unlocking of the defense category. 1,200 construction points. Junho opened the unlock tree and found the defense category. What it contained made him stop. Not weapons, no. The system did not provide weapons, but it provided something that, in the conditions of the apocalypse, was worth more than any weapon. Fortress-class access control system. Biometric gateways, external perimeter sensors, threat identification system. In conditions where the water would rise and thousands of desperate people would search for any solid surface above the flood level, this was the difference between a shelter and a mass grave. Junho closed the interface and looked at the platform. Jang Bamin's crew had already begun unloading the metal structures for the frame. Steel beams, corner nodes, installation trusses, everything had arrived a day ahead of schedule because a week earlier Junho had paid for priority delivery. The next 10 days, he said to Jang Bomin as he approached him. The frame of the first level, height 6 meters from the platform. You have the scheme. Jang Bomin nodded, no longer asking unnecessary questions. In 18 days, he had become used to the fact that the client knew what he wanted, paid on time, and did not waste words. We'll make it, he said. Provided the weather does not fail us. The weather will fail on the 22nd to 23rd day, said Junho. Strong wind, possible precipitation. Factor that into the schedule. Jang Bomin looked at him with mild surprise. Are you a meteorologist too? No. I just looked at the forecast. There was no such forecast, no service gave data 10 days ahead with such accuracy, but Junho remembered. In his past life, the storm came exactly on the 22nd day after the start of the apocalypse, which meant that now, before it began, the cyclone was already forming somewhere in the Sea of Japan. The frame grew quickly. The steel columns rose upward with the methodical rhythm of a well-tuned mechanism. Horizontal trusses connected them into a rigid spatial grid. The welders worked in 3 shifts, and at night the platform glowed with blue flashes of welding, visible from the shore like small, uneven stars. Junho walked around the site every 2 hours. Not because he did not trust the crew. Jang Bamin and his men proved to be professionals in the full sense of the word. He simply could not do otherwise. He could not step aside and let the process go on without his gaze. The system regularly highlighted details that needed attention. Not mistakes, but points where a standard solution could be improved right now, without redoing anything. Increase the slope angle of the roof trusses by 2 degrees, better water runoff during heavy rain. Additional diagonal braces in the northwest sector, compensation for torque during side wind. He made these changes quietly without explanations. He simply told Jang Bamin, "Here, like this." And Jang Bamin did it like that. On the 22nd day, the storm came. Junho was ready. All open structures were covered, unsecured elements were removed, and the crew got the day off. He sat alone on the platform under a temporary tarp canopy and watched the bay change from quiet gray into something dark, angry, alive. The waves did not rise high after all. It was a bay, not the open sea. But the pontoon sections reacted to each of them, and Junho could feel that reaction through his legs, a light, smooth swaying, almost imperceptible. The pressure valves were working. The platform held. He sat and looked at the water and thought not about the storm and not about the platform. He thought that in his past life on this day, they had been sitting in an apartment on the 4th floor in Incheon, already flooded up to the 2nd. And Minjun had been telling how the neighbor from the 5th floor did not want to let them in. "Greedy old man," Minjun had said. "He doesn't understand that we are all in the same situation." Junho remembered that back then he had stayed silent. He had thought to himself, the neighbor is right. But he had not said it. Now he thought, the neighbor was the only smart person in that building entrance. The storm ended by the evening of the 23rd day. The platform took 0 damage. The crew returned the next morning. Jang Bomin went around all the nodes, tapped the joints, checked the welds, and came to Junho with an expression that Junho had already learned to read, a mix of professional respect and slight bewilderment. "Not a single bit of damage," he said. "I know. Have you built anything before?" "No." "Then how?" "Good blueprints," said Junho. "Let's continue." By the 28th day, the frame of the first level was ready. The system issued a notification before Yang Bomin had time to report completion. Skeleton task completed. Received 1,200 CP, unlocked. Defense current CP balance 2,500. New task, skin install the external hull panels and roofing of the first level. Deadline, 8 days. Reward, 1,500 CP plus unlocking of advanced blueprints. Second level, 8 days. 14 remained until the apocalypse. Junho opened the new defense category and studied the available blueprints. The access control system was the first item: biometric gateways at 3 entry points, perimeter sensors along the entire outer contour of the platform, and a video surveillance system with night mode. The second item made him stop. External perimeter, waterproof storm shields. Retractable panels made of reinforced polycarbonate that closed all openings upon activation. Closure time 40 seconds. Protection from waves up to 4 meters high and wind pressure up to 60 meters per second. He added both blueprints to the active list and sent the updated specifications to Yomsangu. Yomsangu called back 20 minutes later. "Junho," he said cautiously. "Biometric gateways, perimeter sensors, storm shields on all openings. Are you preparing for war?" "For a storm," said Junho. "You do not need biometric gateways for a storm." "You do," said Junho. "When the storm is long and people start looking for shelter, you do." A long pause. "All right," said Yomsangu at last, in the tone of a man who had decided not to think too deeply. "Timeline and budget?" "Same timeline. I will transfer the budget today." The next 8 days were the most intense. 3 processes were happening simultaneously: installation of the external hull panels, installation of the storm shields, and laying of the primary communications. Junho worked together with the crew, not in the role of a supervisor, but literally. He carried materials, held structures during fastening, climbed the scaffolding at 7 in the morning, when the bay was covered in fog and the metal was cold and wet. On the 3rd day, Jang Bomin said to him, "You could just watch. You pay, we work. I watch faster when I'm nearby, Junho answered. That was true, but not the whole truth. The whole truth was that he did not know how to just watch. Not because he did not trust them, but because every day, every hour of work gave him something besides progress on tasks. It gave him a feeling he had lost in his first life somewhere between the third week on the raft and the moment Minjun began dividing the supplies without him. The feeling that he was creating something real, something that would still stand when everything else went under the water. On the 34th day, the first level of the shelter was sealed. The external panels, matte gray, made of multi-layer reinforced composite, gave the structure a look that was hard to describe in one word. Not a residential building, not an industrial facility. Something in between functional, somewhat grim, absolutely self-assured. The storm shields were tested the same day. 40 seconds and all openings were closed. 20 more seconds open. The system worked without failures. The biometric gateways were configured for one person. 1. Jung Bo-min saw Junho register his fingerprints, iris, voice. He saw there were no other profiles. 1, he asked. 1, Junho confirmed. Jung Bo-min was silent for a moment. It'll be boring here alone. It won't, said Junho. The system issued a notification. Skin task completed. Received 1,500 CP unlocked. Advanced blueprints. Second level current CP balance. 4,000 special notification time remaining until classified event. 8 days. The system recommends immediate installation of life support and energy systems. Priority. Critical. 8 days. Junho closed the interface, looked at his platform, dark, quiet, standing on the water of the bay like a small island in a world that still did not know it had 8 days left, and said to himself, "It's enough. Enough for what is needed." He turned to Jang Bo-min. "We need to talk about the next stage. Sit down." Jang Bo-min sat opposite Junho on an overturned box from under the fasteners and looked at the list that Junho had placed before him on the tablet. The list was long. "In 8 days?" he asked slowly. "In 8 days. Junho." Jang Bo-min raised his eyes. Generator system, water purification, air exchange, backup fuel tanks, food storage with climate control. That is at least 3 weeks of work at a normal pace. "I know," said Junho. "That is why we need 2 crews, yours and another one. Work around the clock. I double the rate for every day above the normal pace." A long pause. "You're doubling it. I'm doubling it." Jang Bo-min looked at the list again, then at Junho. There was something new in his gaze, not just professional interest, something like concern. "Listen," he said cautiously. "I don't pry into other people's business. You pay, I build. But you are building this place like you know that things outside are going to get bad soon. Really bad. What is happening?" Junho looked at him for 3 seconds. "Nothing you need to worry about," he finally said. "Just finish the work on time. That is more important than anything else." Jang Bo-min nodded slowly without complete conviction. But he nodded. "I know another crew. Good guys worked with me in Songdo. I'll call them tonight." "Good," said Junho. "And one more thing." "What?" "When you're done, leave Incheon. Go as far inland as possible. To the mountains, if you have somewhere to go." Jang Bo-min looked at him for a long time. "Why?" "Just advice," said Junho, "from a man with good blueprints." The next 8 days merged into one continuous work process with no boundary between morning and night. No days off. No pauses longer than those needed to eat and sleep for 4 hours. 2 crews worked in parallel, and Junho kept both lines in his head at once. What the first were doing, what the second were doing, where they would intersect, where they could interfere with one another. What needed to be rearranged by priority if one of the deliveries was delayed. The system helped but did not control. It gave blueprints and parameters, highlighted critical points, warned of installation errors before they became a problem. But he made the decisions himself. That mattered to him, not to surrender decisions, neither to the system nor to people. On the 3rd day of this final sprint, the generators arrived. Not ordinary diesel ones. The system had provided blueprints for a hybrid installation. Diesel as the main source, solar panels as the secondary one, and a small hydrogen block as an emergency reserve in case the fuel ran out. Junho ordered components from 3 different suppliers and assembled the final configuration himself. With the help of one electrician from the second crew, a silent man of about 45 named Park Il-wan, who soldered the connections with such precision that Yunho involuntarily stopped to watch. "Good work," he said once. Park Il-wan did not answer. He only nodded and continued soldering. Junho appreciated that. On the 5th day, the water purification system arrived. It was perhaps the most complex element of the whole project, not from the point of view of installation, but from the point of view of logic. The system gave a blueprint for multi-stage purification, mechanical filtration, biological block, ultraviolet disinfection, mineralization. At the output, drinking water from any source, including seawater, provided a desalination module was added. Junho ordered the desalination module too. Not because the bay was salty it was, but not critically so, but because he remembered, in his past life when the water rose, it brought with it all the fuel, chemicals, and decayed organic matter. By the 3rd month of the flood, the water outside was unfit for contact with skin, let alone for drinking. He remembered the smell of that water. Installation of the water purification block took a day and a half. The system accepted it without remarks. On the 6th day, Junho received a call from Ogisak, the owner from whom he had leased the pier. "Mr. Junho," the old man said cautiously, "I drove by this morning, looked at your project, and it is big. Bigger than I thought when we made the agreement." "The lease agreement includes all improvements I make to the property," said Junho. "I sent you a copy." "Yes, I read it." Pause. "Tell me, what are you building there? People are asking. Neighboring tenants in the port say you have construction going on around the clock." "A residential facility," said Junho. "Everything is within the framework of the agreement. It looks like a bunker." Junho was silent for a second. "Mr. Ogisak," he said calmly, "I will give you one piece of advice for free. In a week, take your family and go to the mountains. Hangju, Seoraksan, Jirasan. It doesn't matter. The main thing is above 500 meters above sea level. Take supplies for 3 months." A long silence. What does that mean?" "It means I gave you advice," said Junho. "What you do with it is your business. Goodbye." He ended the call. He did not know whether Ogisak would listen. Most likely not. People do not listen to warnings that do not fit into their picture of the world. He remembered that from his first life too, how he had tried to explain, warn, persuade, and how it did not work. Now he had warned once. That was enough. On the 7th day, the system issued a new notification unexpectedly. Unscheduled task. Stockpiles. Fill the shelter's storage with a minimum strategic reserve. Minimum requirements. Food. 365 days of autonomous nutrition for one person. Medicines, basic hospital kit fuel. 90 days of generator system operation. Seed stock, minimum 40 types of crops. Deadline before event activation. Reward 2,000 CP plus unlocking. Expansion, agricultural tier. Junho read the list twice. Seed stock. The system was thinking further ahead than he himself had planned at this stage. The flood would not last forever. When the water began to recede, and it would recede, he knew that because in his past life it began to recede, by the end of the 2nd year the survivors would need to grow something. He opened the list and started calculating. Food for one person for a year was solvable. Canned goods, freeze-dried products, grains, oil. He had already started purchases a week earlier in small batches so as not to attract attention. Now it needed to be accelerated. Medicines were harder. Not in the sense of money, but in the sense of assortment. The basic hospital kit included items that were not sold in an ordinary pharmacy. Surgical instruments, intravenous systems, antibiotics in large volumes, painkillers. Fuel was the easiest. A few calls to suppliers, and by tomorrow evening the reserve tanks would be full. As for the seed stock, he called 2 places, a garden center and a small agronomy company that supplied farming operations. He explained what he needed, said he would pay cash. Both agreed. By the end of the 7th day, the storage rooms were 80% filled. The 8th day was the last one before the end. Junho got up at 5 in the morning, although truthfully he had barely slept. Not because of anxiety. It was simply that his mind would not shut off it. Kept running through lists, checking sequences, looking for what might have been overlooked. He walked through the whole shelter alone with a flashlight, although the electrical system was already functioning and the lighting was connected. He simply needed to walk through every compartment himself, physically. The generator block is working, quietly, evenly, almost without vibration. The water purification system is running in test mode. The indicators are normal. The storage rooms are filled. Shelves with canned goods, sealed containers with grains, refrigerated sections with medicines. The living compartment is minimalist without excess. A bed, a table, several chairs, shelves. He was not building a palace. He was building something that works. The agricultural tier was empty for now, only the structure. The seed stock task had given him a blueprint for a hydroponic system. Not now, but later, when the first wave of chaos settled, he would deploy it. The observation post on the roof offered a 360-degree view with a protected perimeter made of transparent polycarbonate. From here, the entire bay and part of the coastline were visible. Junho stood at the observation post for a long time. Incheon below was living its life. Early morning, a few cars, the lights of the port, a container ship at anchor, a fishing boat somewhere near the northern breakwater. Tomorrow, he thought. Tomorrow, all of this will change. He did not know exactly back then the apocalypse had come without warning. First, anomalous precipitation in the north, then reports of rising water levels in coastal areas, then, within a few hours, something that could not be called anything other than the end. Where it came from, he never understood in his past life. A geological catastrophe, a climate collapse, something scientists had not had time to explain before they stopped communicating. The system did not give explanations either, only a classification. Omega level, global flood. Maybe explanations did not matter. Water does not ask whether you understand its causes. At 9 in the morning on the 8th day, Zhang Bomine arrived to hand over the site. Formally, it was simply the final inspection, but Unhe knew that Zhang Bomine had not come only for that. He had come to look once more, to make sure of something that had not let him rest for the last few days. They walked through the site together in silence. Zhang Bomine tapped on the structures, checked the fastenings, examined the welds professionally, methodically. Junho walked beside him and did not hurry him. At the end of the inspection, they went out to the observation post. Zhang Bomine looked at the bay for a long time. "You told me to go to the mountains," he finally said. "Yes, why?" "Because soon it will be dangerous here." "A flood?" Junho was silent for a moment. Something like that. Zhang Bomine turned to him. There was no fear in his face, rather that particular seriousness of a man used to assessing structures and understanding when something has been built to withstand extreme loads. "This is a shelter," he said. "Not a question, a statement." "Yes, you built it for the apocalypse." Silence. "You built it for what is coming," Zhang Bomine continued quietly. "You know what is coming." "How?" Junho looked at him directly. "It does not matter how. Only one thing matters. Take your crew away. Today. Pay them, let them go home to their families. Tell them what I told you to the mountains, above 500 meters, supplies for 3 months. They may not believe you, but tell them." A long pause. "And you? I will stay here. Alone. Alone." Zhang Bomine looked at him for a long time with an expression Junho could not quite read. Not pity. More like the way one looks at a man who has made a decision that cannot be understood, but cannot be argued with either. "You are a strange man, Park Junho," he said at last. "I know." Zhang Bomine held out his hand. Junho shook it. "I will tell the guys," Zhang Bomine said, "about the mountains. Maybe someone will listen. That is enough." By the evening of the 8th day, the crew had left. In the last vehicle to leave was Park Il-won, the taciturn electrician who soldered connections with surgical precision. Before getting into the van, he stopped and looked at Junho. "Are you serious about the mountains?" he asked. "Serious. My wife and daughter are in Suwon." "Take them and go to Soraksan," Junho said. "The higher the better. In a week you will understand what I meant." Park Il-won nodded once briefly, got into the vehicle, left. Junho stood on the pier and watched the van disappear around the bend of the port road. Then he turned toward his shelter. It stood on the water as a dark and quiet rectangle. The light inside was dimmed. The generators were running silently. The storm shields were raised, all openings were open. The last normal evening. He climbed aboard, sealed the entrance airlock, went up to the observation post and sat down on a folding chair, looking at the lights of Insaan. The system issued the final notification of the day. Stockpiles task completed received. 2000 CP unlocked. Expansion agricultural tier. Current CP balance. 6,000 system warning time until classified event. Less than 24 hours. Recommended? Activate full readiness mode. Storm shields close. Generators switch to autonomous mode. External communications preserve until the last moment. Good luck, Park Jun-ho. He smirked, quietly, without amusement. The system had wished him luck. That was something new. He did not close the storm shields right away. He gave himself a few more hours, sat at the observation post, listened to the distant city noise, watched the lights go out and come on. An ordinary city, an ordinary night. Then he took out his phone and opened the news. The first reports were already appearing, still cautious, with question marks. Anomalous precipitation in northern Japan. Rising water levels in coastal areas of Hokkaido. Meteorologists were speaking of atypical atmospheric pressure over the Sea of Japan. No one had yet used the word catastrophe. No one yet understood. Junho put down the phone and looked at the bay. The water was calm, almost mirror-like. Not for long, he thought. He stood up, went down inside, sealed all the hatches and activated the storm shields. 40 seconds and the shelter was closed. Junho woke from a sound. Not from a crash, not from an explosion, from a sound that was like the way pressure changes in your ears during a rapid climb in altitude. A quiet, internal, almost imperceptible shift. He opened his eyes and understood immediately, even before he looked at the monitors. It had begun. He got up, pulled on a jacket, went up to the observation post and opened the exterior cameras. The dawn was strange, not red and not pink, but some kind of grayish yellow, as if the sky had put on a dirty film. The bay outside was different, not mirror-like, as it had been last night, but disturbed, finely rippling with dark streaks of currents that had not been there before. The water level had risen, a little by 20 centimeters, maybe 30. Unnoticeable to a person who was not looking specifically, but the shelter's sensors recorded it precisely, plus 27 centimeters over the last 6 hours. Junho turned on the radio. The first few minutes were ordinary morning broadcasting. Weather, traffic, sports news, then an emergency interruption. The announcer's voice was steady, but with that particular tension that even a well-trained announcer cannot completely hide. An anomalous rise in water level has been recorded along the entire western coast. The authorities of Insaan urge residents of coastal areas to remain calm and follow official announcements. Evacuation has not yet been declared, however. Junho turned off the radio. Has not yet been declared. In 4 hours it will be declared. In 8 there will be no one left to declare it, because the broadcasting studio will be underwater. He opened the system interface. Event activated classification. Global flood. Omega level. Forecast water level rise over 72 hours plus 12 to 18 meters. Forecast water level rise over 30 days plus 80 to 120 meters. Forecast maximum plus 340 to 400 meters over 18 to 24 months. Shelter status, active structural integrity, 100% life support systems, normal recommended, remain inside. Junho looked at the numbers for a long time. In his past life, he did not know these numbers. No one knew there had been no system to provide a forecast. There had only been the feeling that the water was rising faster than it should. Faster than any flood, faster than any storm. 800 meters above sea level, that is survival. Everything below is a matter of time. Insaan stood at sea level. He got up from the monitor and walked through the shelter along the same route he had taken last night. But now differently. Not like an inspection, but like a man moving in. Who is staying? Generators. Water, storage, living quarters. Everything worked. He sat down at the table in the living quarters, poured himself coffee from the thermos, real, good coffee, which he had bought 3 days ago and brewed in the morning, and opened the laptop. He had time. The water was rising, but the shelter would survive the first critical hours without his intervention. The system tracked the parameters, the pontoon sections adjusted buoyancy automatically. He did not need to do anything right now. So he did what he had not had time to do over the last 36 days. He thought. The first thought was of Jang Bomin. Had he left? Junho did not know. He hoped so. Jang Bomin was a smart man. not one of those who ignore warnings simply because they are inconvenient. The second thought was of Park Il-wan and his wife and daughter in Suwon. The third was of old man Obisak with his fishing shop. He caught himself on those thoughts and stopped. Why? He did not know these people. Jang Bomin was a hired foreman. Il-hwan a hired electrician. Oh, Gisak a landlord. Business relationships, nothing personal. He had warned them once each. That was all he owed them. To keep thinking about them after that was... what? Sentimentality, weakness, a habit from his past life when he had thought himself responsible for the people around him. Look where that led, he told himself silently. 4 people he trusted. 3 months during which he fed and protected them. The second when they pushed him. And the water that accepted him calmly as if it had known he would come. He closed the laptop and stood up. Behind the porthole, he had installed 4 round portholes on the side walls of the living quarters. 1 on each side, the water was already different. Darker, faster. It was moving not like a bay, but like something bigger. As if somewhere out there beyond the horizon, a faucet the size of an ocean had been opened. He pressed his palm to the cold glass of the porthole. The shelter rocked almost imperceptibly, smoothly. The platform rose slightly, the pressure valves had engaged, compensating for the new level. The system was working. Good, Junho thought. Good. By noon, the radio had stopped broadcasting. It happened in the middle of a sentence. The announcer was saying something about the evacuation of the northern districts of Insaan, and suddenly silence. White noise. Junho switched across several frequencies. One gave static, another an intermittent signal, no longer a voice, just a tone. The third was completely silent. He turned off the radio and switched to the exterior cameras. What he saw he had already seen once, but that did not make it easier. Insaan was drowning. Not abruptly, not in an explosion slowly, with that particular inevitability that is worse than any explosion. The water moved through the streets as if business-like, filling underground parking garages, first floors, courtyards. Cars stood in water up to the wheels, then up to the hoods, then disappeared. People were visible on the cameras as small figures running toward higher ground. He saw someone climbing onto a roof, someone carrying a child in their arms, waist deep in water. Several people trying to tie a boat to a lamppost. He watched in silence. Then he turned off the exterior cameras. Not because he did not care, but because watching and doing nothing destroys you. He knew that from his past life. There too, there had been many moments when he saw people drowning and could not help. The raft was too small. Resources were not enough. And every person saved meant fewer chances for those already on board. Now he had a shelter for one person, designed for one person, supplies for one person. It was not an accident. It was a decision. In the evening of the first day, the system issued a new task. Task. First night. Survive the first 24 hours of the event without critical damage to the shelter. Current status in progress. Forecast favorable. Reward 3,000 construction points plus unlock navigation and cartography. 3,000 construction points and navigation. Junho lifted his gaze from the interface. Navigation. The system was thinking about what would come after when the water rose enough for the shelter to become not just a refuge, but a ship, a floating platform in a world without shores. That changed the picture. He opened the preview of the navigation and cartography category. The system gave access to the interface even before unlocking, only without the ability to use the blueprints. Propulsion system for the platform. Anchor systems for fixing it at the desired point. Flood maps with forecasts by region. Sonar for measuring depth. Long-range communication means. On the last one, long-range communication means he held his gaze. In his past life, the most terrible thing had not been the water or the hunger. The most terrible thing had been the uncertainty. Complete, absolute silence when you do not know whether anyone else is alive, whether there is land somewhere, whether there is any point in moving in some direction or not. Communication is information. Information is decisions. Decisions are survival. He closed the preview and returned to the main interface. The night of the first day. Outside the shelter walls, the water had already risen by 3 meters. The sensors showed it calmly, like air temperature. The pontoon platform rose with the level, evenly and steadily. Outside, it was probably howling and crashing. He did not hear it. The shelter muted external noise almost completely. The silence was functional. Junho lay down on the bed without undressing in case he needed to get up quickly at night. Put the tablet beside him. Closed his eyes. The last thought before sleep was strange, not about the water, not about the system, not about what would happen tomorrow. He thought that today, for the first time in many months, both in the first life and in this one, he did not need to trust anyone. He did not need to watch other people's hands. He did not need to calculate who and when would decide that he had become ballast. Just him and the shelter that he had built himself. It was strangely similar to peace. Junho woke because the shelter had tilted. Not much 3 degrees, no more. But after 2 days of perfect horizontality, it felt like a slap. He jumped up, grabbed the tablet, opened the system sensors. The northwestern pontoon block. Pressure valve number 17 partial blockage. Buoyancy in that sector had dropped by 12%. Not critical, but if not corrected, in a few hours it would become critical. He pulled on the wetsuit he had bought in advance, thick with thermal protection, took the tool bag and went out through the lower technical hatch. Outside was the end of the world. He had known it intellectually since last evening, but one thing is to know from sensors. Another is to stand on the outer technical tier of the shelter, half a meter above the surface of the water, and see it with your own eyes. Insaan was gone, or rather it was there, but underwater. Only the upper floors of tall buildings stuck out of it, dark rectangles like the teeth of a drowned man. The port cranes had almost completely gone under. Debris floated on the surface, not the kind that comes after a storm. Different. Things. Furniture. Plastic containers. Something he preferred not to look at too closely. The sky was low, gray, with a yellowish glow at the horizon like a bruise. The wind struck horizontally from the west, carrying with it a smell that Junho recognized immediately. He remembered that smell from his past life. Dampness, salt, something organic, the smell of a world decaying. He turned away from the horizon and went down to the technical hatch of the lower tier. Valve number 17 turned out not to be clogged, but damaged. A piece of rebar carried by the water had struck it hard enough to deform the casing. It had not pierced it, had not broken it, just shifted it by a couple of millimeters. Enough to break the seal and let air slowly escape from the chamber. Junho worked quickly, hands in icy water, tools slipping in his gloves. 20 minutes, the valve was replaced with a spare from the tool compartment. The system confirmed restoration of pressure in the block. He climbed back up, wet to the shoulders, although the wetsuit kept him warm. He stood by the entrance airlock and looked at the water around him. Far away, about 300 meters to the north, he saw a boat. A small rubber one, clearly overloaded. There were 6 or 7 people on it. Junho could not make it out exactly from that distance. They were rowing toward him. He watched them for several seconds, then went inside and closed the airlock. The knocking began 20 minutes later. Not on the airlock, on the hull. Outside there was a dull metallic pounding, uneven, desperate, then voices. He could not make out the words through the shell, but he heard the intonation. A plea turning into a demand, turning into a scream. Junho sat at the table with a mug of coffee and looked at the system monitor. The exterior cameras showed the boat pressed against the side of the shelter. There were 8 people on it, men, women, 1 child. All soaked, all in panic. One of the men was striking the hull with a crowbar, rhythmically, hard, with the expression on his face that meant he would keep doing it for a very long time. Junho looked at the monitor. The system was silent. No task about this. No hint. Only him and 8 people outside. He shifted his gaze to the monitoring of supplies. The calculation was simple and cold. He had food for 365 days for 1 person. With 8 people, 45 days. In a full flood, which, according to the system forecast, would last 18 to 24 months. 45 days was death. Just slow. But that was not the only calculation. 8 strangers in an enclosed space. In conditions where resources were limited and the situation would not improve for months. With no ability to go out, leave, part ways. He knew how that works. He had lived through it in his past life with 4 people he had known for years, trusted, shared everything with, and they pushed him into the water. With strangers cornered, it would happen faster. The pounding outside intensified. Now another voice too, a female one, high with that sharp note that comes when a person is no longer asking, but begging. Junho set the mug on the table, stood up, went to the external communication device he had installed it between the exterior camera and the airlock, a small speaker with a microphone. Press the transmit button. I can hear you, he said. His voice came out even, without trembling. The shelter does not take people in. There are no supplies. Outside it went quiet for a second. Then the voices again, now louder all at once. He released the button and stopped listening, returned to the table, sat down, picked up the mug. The pounding continued for another 40 minutes, then ceased. He did not look at the exterior cameras. He did not want to know where the boat had gone. The system issued a notification that same day, closer to evening, first night task completed. Received 3000 CP unlocked, navigation and cartography, current CP balance, 9000 new task. Islands. Using the navigation system, identify 3 potential points of resource value within a radius of 50 kilometers. Deadline, 14 days. Reward, 2,500 CP plus unlock expansion, mobile platform, 9,000 construction points. Junho opened the new category navigation. The map unfolded in the interface as if alive. Topography of the flooded terrain, projected water level lines for different time periods, markers of potential high ground. The Saraxen mountain massif to the northeast glowed green. The elevation was sufficient. There could be survivors there. The ridges of Jirisan to the south as well. And several separate points. Industrial zones on hills, high-rise buildings, port facilities which, according to the system's calculations, remained above water. Mobile platform, he read again. That meant an engine. The ability to move. To stop being an anchor in one place and become a ship. That changed everything. He poured himself another mug of coffee and began studying the map. They appeared on the 7th day. Junho saw them on the exterior cameras from a distance, already a raft. Not like in his past life, but similar. Several boards tied together with ropes, somehow reinforced with plastic barrels for buoyancy. 4 people on it. He recognized them before he had time to be surprised. Choi Min-jun first. A tall silhouette, characteristic movements. Beside him, Lee Sonu, bent over the edge of the raft and looking at something in the water. Kim Hae-in sat in the center, arms wrapped around herself. An Jae-hyun stood and looked ahead, and it was he who saw the shelter first. Junho watched their reaction on the camera. Jae-hyun said something to the others. Min-jun raised his head. Hae-yun stood up. All 4 were looking at the shelter at its dark, even silhouette above the water. There was something in their postures that Junho recognized immediately. Relief. That sharp, almost animal joy, when after prolonged horror you suddenly see something solid and reliable. They began rowing toward it. Junho took a sip of coffee, set the mug down, waited until they came close enough and began knocking on the side. He did not answer immediately, let them knock for a minute. Then he turned on the communication device. Who is there? Min-jun's voice came at once, with that familiar warmth that could seem sincere. Junho? Junho, is that you? It's Min-jun. Choi Min-jun, remember me? We studied together, I remember you, Junho said. A brief pause. Then Min-jun again, already faster, with a note of relief. Thank God. Junho, we need help. There are 4 of us. We have almost no food. The raft is falling apart. We've been in the water for 3 days. I know, Junho said. Let us in. Please. We are old friends, No. Silence. A long one, 4 seconds or so. Junho counted. What? That was Jae-hyun's voice. Quiet, not angry, more not understanding. No, Junho repeated. 1 word, without explanation, without apology. Junho. Min-jun again. What do you mean, no? We are dying here. It's us, you know us. I know. Then why? Because no, Junho said. I heard you. My answer is no. You have room. That was Lee Sonu now, his voice ragged, with that aggressive panic that comes when fear finds no other outlet. We can see your shelter. There is room for 4 people there. Don't pretend that. I'm not pretending, Junho said. There is no room. Junho, that was Kim Hae-un's voice. Quiet, almost calm, and precisely because of that sharp. Junho, I know we have not been close lately, but now this is different. Please. He looked at the camera. Hae-un stood at the side of the raft and looked toward the communication device. Her face was wet with rain or water, he could not tell exactly. That expression, the one she had always known how to make. Open, slightly defenseless. She had always known how to look as if she could be trusted. He remembered how she had been the first to turn away. "My decision will not change," he said evenly. "I recommend moving northeast, the Soroksan mountain massif. There are elevations there that remain above water. About 100 kilometers in your direction." 100 kilometers? Sonu was almost shouting. "On this raft? Do you understand what you were saying?" "I do," Junho said. "You are killing us." A long pause. "No," Junho said quietly. "I am not killing you. I am simply not saving you." He pressed the button and turned off the communication device. They stayed beside the shelter for another 3 hours. Junho knew that from the perimeter sensors, 4 objects on the northwestern side, motionless. He did not turn on the exterior cameras. He did not go to the portholes. He did what he had planned to do, studied the navigation map, marked points of resource value for the system task, checked the generator block. There was no more knocking, no voices either. Then the sensors showed that the objects had begun moving away to the northeast. He allowed himself to exhale. Not because it had been difficult, but because all that time he had been waiting for it to become difficult for something inside him to break, when he heard Haeun's voice or saw Minjun trying to appear calm. But nothing broke. There was only a cold, even clarity. 4 people on a collapsing raft who 3 months earlier had pushed him into the water without hesitation. He did not let them in, and felt not guilt. He felt something akin to completion, like when you close the last page of a book you have been reading for too long. The system was silent. It gave no task, made no comment. Junho opened the navigation map and returned to work. By the 14th day, the water had risen by 38 meters. That was more than the system forecast had given. For that time, it had expected 25 to 30. Junho noted the discrepancy and recalculated the forecast forward. If the pace remained, the maximum level would be reached not in 18 to 24 months, but earlier, around 14. That changed one important equation. The shelter had been built with a calculation of 400 meters above level. He had designed with a margin, but 400 meters had been the upper limit of the system's projected maximum. If reality was outpacing the forecast by 30%, he needed to think about it now, not later. He opened the interface and asked directly, "System, at the current rate of rise, what is the projected maximum?" The answer came a few seconds later. Forecast recalculation. At current rise rate of plus 2.7 meters per day. Estimated maximum 440 to 480 meters. Time to maximum approximately 13.5 months. Margin of error plus or minus 8%. Note, the current structure is designed for a rise up to 400 meters. If this level is exceeded, expansion and reinforcement of the foundation tier are recommended. It is recommended to begin planning expansion, 440 to 480. Junho looked at the numbers. 40 to 80 meters beyond the design limit was not critical if he began reinforcement in time. But in time meant now. Not in a month, not in 3. The problem was one thing. Reinforcement required materials. The materials were where there was now water, or at those facilities still holding above the surface. That was exactly why the system had given the task islands identify points of resource value within a radius of 50 kilometers, not out of curiosity, out of necessity. Junho returned to the navigation map. Over the last 14 days, he had methodically plotted everything he could determine from the cameras, sensors, and system data. 3 points emerged clearly. The first was an industrial complex on a hill about 18 kilometers to the east. According to the system map, it was a metalworking zone raised on relief. The upper floors of several buildings stuck above the water, and most importantly, a warehouse. Large, tall, with a metal roof. There could be everything there: rebar, sheet metal, fasteners, tools. The second was a shopping center about 25 kilometers to the south. By elevation above the water level, only the top 2 floors remained. There were building material stores there, judging by the map. Tools, panels, insulation. The third was a port warehouse 9 kilometers to the northwest. According to the system data, it stored ship components, marine fasteners, waterproofing materials, ideal for reinforcing the platform. Islands task completed received. 2,500 CP unlocked. Expansion mobile platform. Current CP balance, 11,500 new. Task First Raid. Conduct a sortie to one of the identified resource points and deliver materials to the shelter. Minimum 500 kilograms of useful cargo. Deadline 10 days. Reward 3,500 CP plus unlock production. Junho opened the mobile platform category. The system offered two options. The first was installation of a stationary engine directly on the platform. Powerful, reliable, but requiring significant time for mounting. The second was a faster option, an auxiliary vessel. A small boat or barge that could be used for short raids, leaving the main shelter at anchor. The auxiliary vessel made sense especially now, when the first task was not to move the shelter, but to reach the resource points and return. But where to get a vessel? He opened the cameras and began systematically scanning the surface around. On the third day of searching, not continuously, but methodically, for several hours a day, he found what he was looking for. 2.5 kilometers to the north, caught on a port crane protruding from the water, a motorboat was bobbing. Small, about 5 meters long, aluminum hull, outboard motor. Judging by its appearance, intact. How it got there did not matter. What mattered was that it was there. Junho put on the wetsuit. To swim 2.5 kilometers in water carrying everything washed off the city's surface, that was a separate experience. He did not swim, he used a towel line, which he wound onto a motorized reel fixed to the shelter's retractable beam. In essence, he stretched a line to the crane, then made his way along it instead of swimming in open water. Slower, but safer. The crane protruded from the water by about 15 meters, an enormous rusty arm holding up the sky. The boat was attached to its lower part, not attached, rather snagged. The stern rail had caught on a crane bracket, and the current simply had not carried the boat away. Junho reached it in 40 minutes. Inspected the hull, no holes, several scratches. The motor was a 4-stroke Yamaha, relatively new. The tank was empty, but that was solvable. The toolbox under the stern seat was closed with a small padlock. He pried the lock open with a crowbar. Inside was a standard set wrenches, a spare spark plug, a towing rope, an emergency flare. And one thing he had not expected, a small waterproof packet with documents. Boat registration and the name of some Sao Jongha. Address, Incheon, Coastal District. Junho looked at the packet for a second, then put it back in the box, closed the lid. He poured a canister of fuel into the tank, which he had brought with him. Started the motor. It started on the second try, coughed for a few seconds, then evened out and hummed steadily, confidently. Junho detached the boat from the crane and piloted it to the shelter. The next day, he made the first raid. The port warehouse, 9 kilometers to the northwest, the nearest point of the three. He set out at 7 in the morning when the water was relatively calm. The sky was low and gray as always, but without active wind. 9 kilometers by motorboat, 20 minutes under normal conditions. But the conditions were not normal. The water surface was strewn with debris. Below the water were invisible obstacles, former buildings and infrastructure. He went slowly, constantly checking against the system's navigation map. He found the warehouse exactly where the map indicated. Only the upper third of the building protruded above the water concrete walls, high openings under the roof through which one could get inside. Junho moored to the wall, secured the boat, climbed inside through the opening. Darkness. The smell of dampness and motor oil. He turned on his headlamp. The warehouse was partially flooded, the water stood about knee-deep, at the level he had reached. But the racks along the walls were high and the upper tiers were dry. For the first 20 minutes, he simply walked and looked. Marine fastening elements, exactly what was needed. High-strength bolts, stainless washers, special marine anchors, several coils of steel cable, waterproofing mastic in large buckets, sheets of marine plywood impregnated with resin, several coils of polyethylene hose, and unexpectedly an entire rack of navigation equipment, GPS devices, depth sounders, several marine radios and factory packaging. The last was more valuable than the metal. He worked for 3 hours, carried, sorted, lowered things into the boat through the opening. By the end of the first raid, the boat was loaded to capacity he estimated by eye and stopped when the sides were 20 centimeters above the water surface. Exactly enough to move without risk of taking on water from small waves. Weighed cargo according to the system data about 620 kilograms. First raid task completed partially, current progress. 620 over 500 kilograms. Completed recommended. Continue gathering resources for the expansion task. The return trip took 35 minutes. With the load, the boat moved more slowly. Junho piloted it carefully, steering around obstacles, and was silent. Outside, there was absolute silence, the kind that never exists in a city. No cars, no noise of port cranes, no voices, only water, wind, and his motor. Sometimes something surfaced from below. He had learned not to look. When the shelter appeared on the horizon, a dark, even rectangle on the water, he felt something that in another life he probably would have called relief. Here there was him. Only him. No negotiations, no votes on whom to throw overboard, no other people's calculations in which he might end up as ballast. Just him, the shelter, and the system. He moored the boat at the technical hatch and began unloading. On the 17th day since the flood began, Junho caught a signal. It happened by chance. He was tuning one of the marine radios found in the warehouse, checking the bands. And on the frequency 156.8 megahertz, the standard marine emergency channel, he heard a voice. Weak with interference, but intelligible. This is Seoraksan 1 base speaking. If anyone can hear us, respond. I repeat, this is Seoraksan 1 base speaking. Frequency 156.8. We are at an altitude of 800 meters, Seoraksan Ridge. There are 23 of us. There are wounded. We need medicines and food. If anyone can hear us. The voice was male, tired, with that particular steadiness that belongs to a man who has repeated the same thing many times already and has almost stopped expecting an answer. Junho sat with the microphone in his hand. 23 people, 800 meters above sea level. Seoraksan Ridge, he had marked that point on the map 2 weeks earlier as a potential resource zone. By water, it was about 110 kilometers away. With his current motorboat, several hours if the weather allowed. Medicines and food. He had medicines. The basic hospital kit that the system had included in the stockpile list. He had food for a year for one person. He set the microphone down on the table. Did not answer. Sat and listened as the voice repeated the message once more. And again. Then silence, a pause between transmission cycles. Junho looked at the map. 23 people on a mountain ridge. Possibly Jang Boman was among them. He had warned him after all. Possibly Park Ilhwan with his wife and daughter from Suwon. Possibly Old Man Ogesok. Possibly, but most likely strangers. And 23 people is not a request for help. It is an organization, a structure. Leaders and followers, allies and opponents, people with different interests and different calculations. He knew how that worked. He closed the map, stood up, went to the kitchen block, cooked rice and canned fish, ate methodically without hurry, put the dishes away. Returned to the radio. The pause between cycles was ending. He could feel it. In a few seconds, the voice would repeat the message again. Junho picked up the microphone, held it in his hand, set it back down, got up and walked out into the living quarters. Lay down on the bed, stared at the ceiling. 23 people. In his past life, he would have answered immediately. He would have rushed to help without thinking. That had been his problem. He always rushed to help without thinking about what would come after. Helped until he became too heavy, until he became ballast. But this was a different life now. Different rules. Or no rules except the ones he would set himself. He closed his eyes. The voice on frequency 156.8 kept repeating its message in the dark again and again like surf. Junho listened and thought. And at midnight, the system issued a notification. New task, contact. Establish stable two-way communication with one of the survivor groups. Deadline, 7 days. Reward, 4,000 CP plus unlock social infrastructure. He opened his eyes, looked at the notification in the darkness of the living quarters for a long time. Social infrastructure, he read. He tapped the terminal. The system unfolded the description. Social infrastructure. A complex of shelter expansions allowing the intake and accommodation of additional residents with an autonomous resource control system, a hierarchical access structure, and individual monitoring. Autonomous resource control system, hierarchical access structure, individual monitoring. The system was smarter than he had thought. It was not telling him let everyone in and be kind. It was saying there is a way to take people in without losing control. A way to build a structure where he sets the rules. Where he is not ballast, but captain. Where access to resources is his decision, not a matter for a vote. Junho sat up on the bed. He looked at the description for a long time. Individual monitoring, biometrics for every resident. He would know who was where, who was eating what, who had access to what. Hierarchical access structure. He would be at the top, everyone else below. Always, autonomous resource control system. No one would be able to take more than what he had determined. No one would be able to decide that he was ballast. Because ballast is never the one holding the keys. He took the radio microphone, found the frequency, held a pause, one breath, and pressed the transmit button. Seorak-san 1 base, he said. This is Shelter 0. I hear you. Over. The reply came after 7 seconds. 7 seconds is a long time when you are waiting. Junho had time to think that they had already turned off the receiver, that the batteries had died, that the group no longer existed. Then a crackle of interference and the voice. The same one he had been hearing for the last several hours, but now there was something new in it. Not joy, something sharper. Something like the way a person who has been walking in the dark for a long time suddenly sees light and does not immediately believe it is not a mirage. Shelter 0. I hear you. Pause. The voice grew hoarse. I hear you clearly. My name is Kim Sang-yeon. Who are you? Where are you located? In the waters of Incheon Bay, said Junho. A floating platform. 1 person. The shelter is autonomous. Another pause, slightly longer. 1? 1. How did you survive in the bay? I built in advance, said Junho. Tell me about your group. Composition, resources, current condition. The voice on the other side, Kim Sang-yeon, was silent for a second. Then, judging by the tone, decided to speak plainly. 23 people. 4 children, 2 of them under 5. 3 wounded fractures, 1 serious. Food for roughly 8 to 10 days on strict rations. Medicines ran out 3 days ago. Painkillers yesterday. Shelter a tourist base on the ridge, wooden buildings. Still holding heat for now. No generator, lighting by flashlights, batteries running low. Junho listened and at the same time opened the map in the system interface. Seorak-san, 110 kilometers. By water, in calm weather and with his current boat, about 4 hours one way. 8 there and back. Your elevation, he asked. 820 meters by GPS. The water has risen to 38 meters as of today, said Junho. Pace is around 2.5 meters per day. You have time, but not endless time. At the current pace, your position will be under threat in about 200 days. Silence. You calculated that? Yes. And what is your forecast for the maximum? 440 to 480 meters. A long pause. Junho imagined how, there on the mountain ridge in a wooden building, 23 people were hearing that number. Or maybe not hearing it? Perhaps Sang-yeon was speaking aside, not in front of everyone. So we are not safe, Sang-yeon said at last. Quietly. As a fact, not a question. No one is safe, said Junho. The only question is how much time there is and what to do with it. Can you help us? Junho looked at the map. I can deliver medicines and part of the food. 1 trip within the next 2 days, weather permitting. 1 trip, that is. That is not a solution to your problem, said Junho directly. It is time. Time to think about the next step. Pause. And what is the next step, in your opinion? That depends on you, said Junho. I will call again tomorrow morning. Prepare an exact list of medicines and priorities for food. He pressed the button and disconnected. Set the microphone down. Sat in the silence of the shelter and looked at the navigation map, at the blue dot of his shelter and the small Seoraksan marker 110 kilometers away. He did not yet know exactly what he was going to do. He only knew that the system had given him a task, and the task made sense. Not sentimental, functional. 23 people with the right management structure could be a resource. Working hands, knowledge, skills. People who knew how to do things he did not, but only with the right structure. Only if he set the rules. The raid to Seorak-san took 11 hours. He set out at dawn. The sky was low, but the wind was tolerable. He loaded the boat with medicines from his own supplies, selected according to the list Sang-yeon had dictated in the morning. Antibiotics, painkillers, bandages, anti-inflammatory drugs, food, canned goods, rice, freeze-dried rations, 2 flashlights with spare batteries, a spare radio. He deliberately took less than he could, Not out of greed, out of calculation. He was not going to solve their problem in a single trip. He was going to begin a conversation. 110 kilometers across flooded Korea that was a separate world. The first 20 kilometers were Incheon and its suburbs. Upper floors jutting out of the water, roofs, antennas, treetops. On one roof he saw people, two of them, waving their arms. He passed by without stopping, not because he was cruel, because he knew stop once and it means stopping everywhere. And he did not have a shelter for 40 people. Not yet. Yet. The word lodged in his head by itself, and he did not bother driving it out. After Incheon came open water, former fields and lowlands, now a flat gray surface without landmarks. He followed the system's navigation map, which showed the terrain under the water and laid out a route around submerged structures. About halfway, he saw another vessel, not a boat, a barge. Large, rusty, clearly improvised into housing. Tarps stretched over the deck, crates set out, people visible. The barge was moving slowly from west to east. He reduced speed, watched for about 30 seconds. They noticed him from the barge, several figures at the rail. Someone raised a hand. Junho accelerated and veered north away from the barge's course. He memorized its coordinates. Put a marker on the map. Large group, mobile, unknown intentions. In this new world, information about other survivors was not humanism. It was reconnaissance. The Seraksan mountain ridge appeared on the horizon 3 hours after departure, first as a dark band above the water, then as real mountain outlines. Junho slowed down. It was strangely beautiful, and he allowed himself to admit it. Mountains rising straight out of the water. No shores, no transition zones, just water, and then at once cliffs, forest, verticality. As if the world had not drowned, but had simply begun differently. The Seraksan 1 tourist base was visible from the water, several wooden buildings on a ledge of the ridge about 100 meters above the water level. Someone had hung a piece of orange fabric outside so it could be seen from the water. Smart. He moored the boat to a rock ledge jutting out of the water at the base of the slope, secured it with the towing rope. They were already waiting for him below. Kim Sang-yeon turned out to be a man of about 45, short, thin, with a short beard and the eyes of someone who had not slept properly for weeks. He came down the trail first, alone, and Junho appreciated that. Sent himself, not someone else. Right instinct. They met at the water. Sang-yeon studied Junho for a few seconds without trying to hide it. "You are younger than I expected," he said at last. "You look more tired than you sounded," Junho replied. Sang-yeon gave a short smile almost against his own will. "Thank you for coming. I brought what you asked for. Let's unload." Unloading took 20 minutes. 3 more came down to help young men, silent, quick. Passed the crates up the trail in a chain. Junho worked with them, did not stand aside. That was calculation, not politeness. He wanted to see how they worked, how they carried themselves, whether there was hierarchy among them and what kind. There was hierarchy. One of the 3, a young man with closely cropped hair, broad-shouldered, clearly carried authority. The other 2 glanced at him before doing anything uncertain. They were not waiting for orders, simply checking themselves against him. Junho memorized his face. When everything was unloaded, Sang-yeon suggested going up to the base. Junho refused. "I need to return before dark," he said. "We will talk here." Sang-yeon nodded. 2 of the unloaders went back up. The broad-shouldered one stayed a little off to the side, but clearly within earshot. Sang-yeon did not tell him to leave. "Interesting." "I want to understand your situation," said Junho. "Who are your people? How did you end up here?" Sang-yeon spoke briefly without unnecessary detail. Junho liked that. The group had formed spontaneously in the first 2 days of the flood. Some were tourists who had been on the ridge when it started. Some were locals from mountain villages who had managed to climb higher. Several people had reached them from below by boat after it began, including a family with children and a female doctor, Liye, who was now tending the wounded. "A doctor." Junho noted it. "Do you have people with technical specialties among you?" he asked. Sang-yeon looked slightly surprised by the question, then answered, "1 builder, 1 former military man, a sapper, a biology teacher, 2 engineering students, 1 cook." "A sapper and a builder are valuable people," said Junho. Sang-yeon looked at him. "You did not come just to deliver medicine," he said. "Not a question, a statement." "No, then why?" Junho was silent for a second. In 200 days, the water will reach your elevation, he said. I have a shelter that by then will be expanded. I need hands and specialists. You need a platform above the water. It is an exchange, not charity. Sangyeon was silent for a long time. The conditions? I set the rules of the shelter, said Junho. Without apology, without softening it, resource distribution is my decision. Access structure is mine. Every resident undergoes biometric registration. In exchange, roof, food, water, safety. The broad-shouldered man by the wall shifted. Not aggressively, just tensed. That sounds like, he began. Ha Junseo, Sangyeon said quietly. He fell silent. Sangyeon looked at Junho again, long and carefully. Why should one person decide for everyone? Because one person built the shelter, said Junho calmly. If you have a shelter, you set the rules. You do not have one yet. Silence. The wind came down from the mountains cold, carrying the scent of pine and water. We need to discuss this with the group, Sangyeon said at last. Of course, said Junho. You have time, roughly 200 days. He untied the boat, put his hand on the rail. I will make contact again in 3 days, he said. Same frequency. Wait, Sangyeon said. Junho stopped. Do you trust people? Pause. No, said Junho. Then why do you want us? Junho looked at him for a second. Because the world after the flood cannot be built alone, he said quietly. And trust and usefulness are different things. He started the motor and headed west. The system did not sleep. While Junho was making raids, reinforcing the foundation, and talking to Sangyeon on the radio 3 times a week, the interface was changing, expanding, accumulating. Tasks came one after another. Second level build the residential tier. Completed on day 42. 8 separate sections with biometric locks, a ventilation system with individual control, a communal dining block with a ration distributor. Agricultural tier launched the hydroponic system. Completed on day 58. 42 crop types, a closed irrigation cycle, ultraviolet lighting. Mobility installed the primary propulsion system on the platform. Completed on day 73. Now the shelter moved on its own slowly but confidently. 4 propulsion nodes, control from the bridge on the upper level. Production installed the basic workshop. Completed on day 89. Welding station, metalworking bench, a small manually driven lathe. Each task added points. Each point opened new blueprints. The shelter was growing not chaotically but according to the logic of the system, which Junho was beginning to understand more and more deeply. The system was not building a palace. It was building an organism. Every new module was tied to the others energetically, functionally, structurally. Remove one thing and you weakened the whole. Good architecture, he sometimes thought, like a living creature. The balance of construction points passed 50,000 by the 100th day. Sangyeon made contact on the 112th day since the flood began. We agree, he said. Junho did not ask again. Did not show relief. Simply asked, all 23? 21. 2 refused. Who? Pause. Hajun Seo and one other man. They decided to stay. The broad-shouldered one. Junho was not surprised. They're right, he said. You will not try to convince them? No. Long pause. All right, said Sangyeon. When are you ready to take people in? I will come in 2 days with a schedule and the list of rules. Read them with the group in advance. Questions through Sangyeon, not personally. Why not personally? Because 21 people with 21 questions is not a conversation, said Junho. It is a crowd. I do not need a crowd. On the 114th day, he brought sheets with rules to Siraksan. There were 12 of them. Printed clearly without decoration. 1. Shelter 0 is governed by one-man rule. Decisions regarding resources, accommodation, and security are made by the shelter administrator. 2. Every resident undergoes biometric registration upon entry. Access to compartments is strictly by level. 3. The daily ration is determined by the administrator based on current supplies and the resident's contribution to the shelter's work. 4. All residents participate in maintaining the shelter. Exceptions children, the severely ill. 5. Conflicts between residents are resolved by the administrator. Vigilante justice is unacceptable. 6. Unauthorized access to shelter systems, immediate expulsion. attempting to seize control of the shelter, immediate expulsion without discussion. And so on 5 more points, equally direct. Sang-yeon read in silence. 2 residents standing nearby read too. One woman, apparently the doctor, Lee Jia, read to the end and raised her eyes to Junho. Point 3, she said. The ration depends on contribution. What about those who cannot work? Children, the wounded. They receive a basic ration regardless of contribution, said Junho. That is implied. That needs to be stated explicitly. Pause. Agreed, said Junho. He took the sheet. Added by hand, children and persons unable to work for medical reasons receive a full basic ration. Lee Jia nodded. Sang-yeon watched the scene with an expression Junho did not read at once. Then he understood it was something like cautious surprise. He had expected a man who never changed decisions, but Junho had changed his because the argument was correct. Those were different things. The relocation took 3 trips. Junho made them over 5 days, each time 5 to 6 people, with minimal personal belongings. The shelter received people through the main airlock. Biometric registration right at the entrance, section assignment, a short briefing from Junho personally, the same every time. 5 minutes, no more. You have read the rules. Questions go to Sang-yeon. My compartment is locked. The control bridge is locked. The generator block is locked. The rest is yours. Most nodded. Some looked wary. Some looked relieved, so sharply relieved that it was almost awkward to watch. Lee Jia came in the last trip. She went into the medical compartment which Junho had set aside and equipped in advance, and an hour later came out with the first list of required equipment. Put it in front of Junho. At the next opportunity, she said. I will see what can be obtained, he replied. That was the longest conversation he had with any of the new residents in the first few days. The shelter changed. Not only structurally, although structurally too. 21 people required more water, more electricity, more space. The hydroponic tier began operating at full capacity. Now 3 residents were assigned to it, tending the crops by schedule. The former military sapper named Jung Min took over technical maintenance of the generator block under Junho's supervision without unnecessary questions. He understood the system in a day and asked only specific questions. Junho answered specific questions. The builder, an older man named Tae-sik, immediately began walking the shelter with the look of someone searching for what could be improved. On the second day, he brought Junho a list of 7 remarks. 6 of them were correct. Good, said Junho. Work on it. Tae-sik nodded and left, happy as anyone can be happy at the end of the world. But there was one thing Junho took the longest to get used to. Sounds. After 100+ days of absolute silence, the shelter became noisy. Voices in the corridors, children crying at night, 2 little ones, 1 older, someone's footsteps overhead, the smell of someone else's food from the communal block. He lay in his compartment, the only one that remained closed to everyone else, and listened to these sounds in the dark. It was strange. Not bad, just strange. Like hearing a world you had thought to bury. On the 158th day of the flood, the system issued a notification he had been expecting and not expecting at the same time. Achievement unlocked. 0 becomes 1. Shelter. 0 has reached a new level of functionality. Residents. 22, including administrator. Autonomy. Confirmed. System level increased to 7. Unlocked. World-scale cartography. Unlocked. Long-range communication. Unlocked. Advanced production. System message. The system has detected activity of other organized survivor groups. Known, 4 groups with populations above 50. Known, 1 group with a population above 200, presumably a military structure. Recommended diplomatic or strategic contact. Junho stared at the last lines for a long time. Military structure. 200 people. In a world with no laws, no state, no army, 200 people with military discipline and resources are not a survivor group. They are a force. A force that sooner or later will start looking for what he has. Shelter, supplies, technology. He closed the notification and opened the long-range map, the new one, with expanded radius. 4 groups glowed as green markers, 1 as red. The red one was about 260 kilometers to the south, above what used to be the Chungcheong Peninsula. 260 kilometers, that was close. In a world without obstacles on land, very close. On the 189th day, the water stopped. Not forever, Junho knew that. Just a pause, the kind that comes when something immense is catching its breath. The sensor showed 0 increase for the 3rd day in a row. Level 412 meters. 30 to 70 remained to the projected maximum. But for now, the water was silent. Junho stood on the observation post alone, early in the morning, while everyone was still asleep. The world outside was strangely beautiful. Ocean because that was what it was now. An ocean, not a bay, not a sea, but a single watery world without shores lay calm as a mirror. Far to the east, the tips of mountain ridges jutted up Tebeksan, Seoraksan, several nameless peaks. Here and there, antennas, spires, structures that had once been part of something large. The sky over the horizon was pale blue for the first time in 189 days, without that dirty yellow film. Maybe it is clearing, he thought. Behind him, the door creaked. He did not turn. The system showed on the tablet who was coming out of which compartments. Sang Hyun came up to the observation post at 6 in the morning, earlier than usual. Sang Hyun stood beside him and also looked at the water, in silence long enough that it was not accidental. It stopped, he said at last. Temporarily, but it stopped. Junho did not answer. The red marker on the map, Sang Hyun said quietly. He had seen Junho's map. Junho had deliberately made it accessible to Sang Hyun a week earlier, when he decided the man could be given one access level higher. Are they moving? Slowly, said Junho. But north? Toward us? Toward us or toward the mountain ridges? One of the two. What are we going to do? Junho looked at the horizon. What he was going to do, he already knew in broad outlines. The system had given him blueprints he still had not opened, not because he was afraid, but because he had been waiting for the right moment. Advanced production. Defensive modifications that were not direct weapons, but would make the shelter much harder to seize. Long-range communication system for contacting the other green groups. 4 green points and 1 red. It was mathematics, he understood, but it was not yet the moment to share every detail with Sang Hyun. Prepare, he said at last. For war? A long pause. For conversation, said Junho. First for conversation. Sang Hyun nodded, was silent a bit longer. You never say anything unnecessary, he said. No. Why? Junho looked at the water. Because words are also a resource, he said quietly. I spend only what is needed. Sang Hyun gave a faint smile, nodded. They stood side by side in silence, 2 men above 412 meters of water that covered everything that had once been a country, cities, lives. From below, from the living compartments, came the first sound of the shelter waking up. Children's voices, someone's footsteps, the smell of rice from the kitchen block. The system flashed quietly in the interface. New task, diplomacy or war. Determine a strategy of interaction with a group of 200 plus people. Deadline, open, reward, unknown. Difficulty, 5 stars. Junho looked at the 5 stars, 5 stars of difficulty. For the first time in 189 days, the system was giving him a task with an open deadline and an unknown reward. He closed the interface, slipped the tablet into his pocket, and kept looking at the horizon where the sun was slowly rising above the calm water, and somewhere beyond the line of sight a red dot was moving that did not yet know he was already thinking about it. Park Junho did not smile. He simply gripped the railing of the observation post a little tighter and began to plan.